And welcome back, everyone, to our final talk of the XP Game Developers Online, not Summit this time, we're online. End of day one. Joining me today, we've got Emmanuel Evdemon, lawyer at Entertainment Council. So Emmanuel, he's a video game geek turned entertainment lawyer with a practice focusing in video games and interactive digital media. He provides business-focused legal advice to individuals, organizations, and businesses in the IDM sector. Emmanuel prides himself on having navigated the IDM sector through many evolutions and continues to embrace the challenges technology, data, and digital bring. Whoops. I just ruined your introduction. I'm so sorry for that. But it's very important to state, start a video game with a TI-99 4A, followed by an NES, and is currently playing Clash Royale, Super Smash Bros., Zelda Breath of the Wild, and Auto Age Standoff. Emmanuel, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Clearly, I'm stumbling a little bit more here at the end of day one.
No problem. It's a pretty amazing feat, and grateful that you included me here. And didn't know I had the extra pressure of being the last presenter.
Whoops, you didn't hear that from me. No, there's 20 more
No.
presenters after.
Everybody's still wide awake, right?
Absolutely. No, well, thank you, Emmanuel, for coming in and sharing this side of the gaming industry that, at least personally, I don't see too much conversation about. And specifically for those joining us, we're going to be having a conversation about what to consider and what to look at when getting ready to do a video game publishing agreement. So this is going to be a bit of a fireside chat style. So any of the viewers on the Mixer stream, feel free to ask your questions as they come up. I'll be asking Emmanuel questions of my own just because I am not well versed in this world myself. So it's a very casual, comfortable conversation. So grab a drink. And is there anywhere that you would be interested in starting, Emmanuel? In terms of
I'm fine with anything. I think the important thing here is that the goal of this conversation, as I see it, is to provide as much information as possible to indie developers out there. They have a very special place in my heart, and I've worked with them for many years. And it really it's that's been the focus of my career since I first embraced the interactive digital media and the video game industry close to 12 years ago. So let's dive in and talk about it. I might go off track a little bit just because I feel that something's really important for an independent developer to know, and please forgive me if I do that.
No, there is no off track. It's all on track in a fireside discussion. Let's start with, have there ever been a horror story? Like, have you seen an indie developer, let's say, or any developer heading for disaster, and you were able to kind of guide them and avert something bad? Like, is there a story that really stands out in your career of like, oh my God, don't do this, or keep an eye out for this?
With relation to a publisher, it hasn't been we haven't had any massive explosions on my watch. I have had some firm discussions with clients saying this or that should be included. I think maybe one of the closer areas was oddly enough not directly involving me, but I came on a little bit after the fact, and it was dealing with marketing. So we can start the chat there. Maybe I'll give a tiny little bit of background. The indie game and the video game industry has evolved a lot. It used to be bricks and mortars. The developer would come up with a concept. They would approach a publisher. The publisher would say yes or no, I'm going to finance it. Developers did not typically self-publish back in the day because you needed to make cartridges or you needed to make discs. You had to make all the packaging. You had to distribute it. You had to use the appropriate manufacturing and the appropriate supply chain that the first party or the console wanted you to use. And so that was extremely expensive. to get these physical properties out there, and I so should have like a video game in my hand right now. I have an NES cartridge even up at the other office, but not here. So that required the publisher. Then we had this, what often people refer to as sort of the democratization of the video game industry, where you had these engines come into play. So you had Unreal, you had Unity, and all of a sudden the video game developer didn't have to code everything themselves from scratch. And that allowed the budget for a video game to drop significantly. When you multiplied the effect of that with the digital marketplace and allowing the digital production of video games and the digital distribution of video games, you didn't have to use that supply chain. You didn't have to make the video game cartridges or discs. You didn't have to publish or print all the material for the packaging and for the instructions, and you didn't have to ship it out to stores. So all of a sudden it was very democratized. You could, as an indie developer, turn around and publish. The role of the publisher then went from being massively on a financing side, as well as obviously the marketing and everything they took care of as well, to very focused on marketing. So what did the publisher bring all of a sudden now that a video game developer could actually produce a AAA quality title when they didn't need the money from the publisher? So the publisher then pivoted and said, okay, well, we bring you an audience. And so we have a following, and we can actively market, and we can give you those things that you're not going to be an expert in. And so that relationship worked quite well for several years. And now what we've seen is that the publishers have come back into play. The marketplace has been kind of flooded with a lot of titles, and we all know how difficult it is to actually get noticed on any type of distribution platform, Steam, app stores. It can be a real task. And so the publishers either have relationships with those distribution portals, or they will also have an audience themselves. And so those are some of the things they bring. And now they're putting money back into it as well. They are starting to provide advances again, and they are starting to help finance the video games. But one of the key elements that, to go back to where I started this tangent, is the marketing. So you want to make sure that you have as clear a marketing provision as possible. Some of the things that you want to look out for is just a number, and that's usually or often a starting point with a publisher. We're going to dump this much money into marketing. When you look at some of the games, some of the biggest AAA titles, we don't have necessarily all the marketing budget and marketing information on them, but it's safe to say that some of these titles have a marketing budget that equals or sometimes even exceeds the development budget for a title. And Grand Theft Auto is one of the ones that comes to mind, having, from my understanding, somewhere in billion-dollar range of marketing. And so when we think about how important marketing has become, we really need to focus on that. So checkpoints are, it's not just about this much money. The reason I say that is because, sure, we can say that we're going to spend that much money, $100,000 on marketing. The problem is, if as a developer, I don't know where that marketing is going, you can see some of these potholes that may or may not have happened in the past, and I may or may not be speaking from some of these stories from the trenches. But it can be called, well, we did spend that, we just spent it internally. And as valuable as an internal spend can be, and it's certainly not to belittle it, it's not necessarily the same value you're expecting as a developer. So you have to look at that and make sure that when we're talking about a dollar amount, it's not an internal spend. So we're not saying, okay, we're attributing $180 an hour to this person who's on our marketing department, um, when that person's on salary anyway.
Right. So it's, it sounds like not all dollars are equal, especially in this world. So how,
Certainly.
outside of just that language that you can kind of, put
Yeah.
in, and I understand too that you can't get too much into the legal advice, but
Yeah.
in the publishing agreement, how much of a detailed plan can you expect? Like, are we talking line item? Is it fair to assume a publisher would outline a marketing plan like line item by line item, or is that?
So my thought on it is get as much as you possibly can. You can always change it later.
Right.
You can always adapt it later.
Okay.
But let's push for as much as we can. So let's say, yes, I do want a plan. If I'm not getting a detailed plan, that's fine. I can get that, and I understand that you may want to pivot here and there. But talk to me about, let's see, what are your plans? How are you planning to run it out? Are you planning to use Facebook advertising? Are you planning to use Twitter advertising? Are you planning to use influencers and get it in the hands of Twitch streamers? Which Twitch streamers, if we can go that route? Let's get into as much detail as we can, and let's talk about how that money is going to be used and how it's going to be allocated. They should be able to provide you with at least a really rough runway of, this is what we're going to start pushing. This is how we're pushing the content X weeks before launch. This is how we're pushing the content days before launch. This is how we're pushing the content at launch. This is how we're pushing the content after launch. Look at the release dates. Keep a really strong eye as a developer on the release date. It would be amazing to be able to, if you see disaster looming, pivot and change that release date, because you do not want to be releasing your RPG at the same release as the new Final Fantasy.
Right.
It's just not going to work out well, and unfortunately, these things do happen. And the indie developer, unfortunately, isn't in a position to say, "Hey guys, do you mind pushing that Final Fantasy just like a week?"
Well, it did get delayed a month, didn't it? So maybe that's what happened there. So
If we could.
yeah, so number one, then don't get stuck on the money. Make sure you get as much of a detailed plan as possible. Then I would assume get as much advice as you can on that plan, because let's face it, not everyone is into marketing. How can you tell one plan is good versus another? If someone says, yeah, we're going to spend all this money in 2 weeks, well, is that better than saying we're going to spend it in a month, in a year, and all of that? Now, in terms of marketing,
There's a couple of other things. Oh, sorry. Go
yo,
ahead.
please go ahead. I was going to jump into exclusivity, so before we get there,
So before we jump into exclusivity,
yeah,
I promise I'll somehow navigate there.
I'm sure you will.
Um, um, Other things that you can expect, which aren't necessarily from the publisher side of the marketing, but what materials are you going to be responsible, and what are you providing? So often the publisher, especially with indie devs, are going to ask you for trailers. They're going to ask you for segments of gameplay. They may ask you for artwork, with which they'll then adapt and create the marketing material from as well. So make sure that you look after your rights and that you maintain your rights in the marketing material. From my perspective as a developer, you should be keeping all the rights in the marketing material except for the branding of the publisher. So if the publisher does mock-ups, and if the publisher does some really, really cool sizzler reels, or some really, really cool visuals, as a developer, I want those, and I want to be able to use those in the future, even if I'm not in the relationship with the publisher. Or the place where it may get a little tricky is if your relationship with the publisher is non-exclusive.
Right. So before we get into
Um,
that, I have a question.
yeah,
So let's say you're working with a publisher for North America, and
yeah,
they prepare this fantastic trailer for you. Then it's safe to say, we most would have the rights to say, hey, could I have that trailer? Because now I want to market, let's say, in Europe, and I want to take this trailer and move it there.
yeah.
Okay.
So this is exactly what I was getting at, the
Ah,
non-exclusivity. So do we have what type of relationship do you have with your publisher? And typically they're going to say, yeah, yeah, we want to just, we want to be the source. We're going to publish it worldwide. We're the guys to take care of it. We're the right team for you. That's not always necessarily the case. Often you want to have, often different publishers have different areas of expertise. Some publishers are really, really good in certain territories. So you may have one publisher that's really, really well represented, well respected in Asia, or even just in Japan, let's say. And maybe it's even tighter. Maybe it's just in Japan in the graphic novel video game or the RPG or the action genre. So we know that not all publishers are created equal. So from the developer's perspective, I want the best publisher in the best place.
mhm.
So I may say, okay, you know what? No, I recognize that you're an amazing publisher in North America. So, and we recognize it's a huge market. We will give you North America. Maybe we'll give you North America and all the English speaking world. Maybe we'll give you North America and whatever territories. But let's talk about that exclusivity. Maybe I want to still, as a developer, sell the video game on my own through my own website. I'll offer keys to the sale of keys. Um, the publisher will often allow that to happen,
Mhm.
but where it gets tricky is when we have another publisher come into play. So one of the elements is just like you said. Okay, what if we want to use that? What if I want to translate that marketing material that publisher A helped develop? Can I use that for publisher B? And that can be a fairly difficult conversation, but the answer doesn't have to be no, because let's remind the publisher that, hey, you're amazing in this area, but we're bringing on this rock star who's going to version it for Japan, and they're going to do an amazing, amazing localization with great language translation, which is obviously another point to talk about. But they're going to do this, and that's just going to benefit all of us because our sales in North America are going to go up, and you're not going to be getting that Japanese versioned market anyway. Because the person buying the Japanese version of the game is either going to buy both the English and the Japanese version of the game, or has already bought the English version of the game, or they're just going to increase the profile and we're going to increase our overall sales because more people are going to know about the game.
Do you find in your experience that it tends to be more, so let's say if you are working with multiple publishers in that kind of scenario, do you find it is more of the kind of the team mindset, like, yeah, we all benefit, let's all work together, or does it tend to be more of a hostile, complicated matter of kind of, no, no, you said this, we have this, like, is it a little bit more territorial in your experience?
Typically, they're in silos.
Mm,
So you're negotiating with one publisher for that area. You're negotiating with another publisher. Where as I was mentioning about trying to cross those relationships with using your marketing material with different publishers, that can get a little bit stickier. And that can be a much more difficult negotiation. But typically, what you'll see is you will see one publisher, and you'll have that relationship. You'll work on that relationship completely separately of the other relationships, and even more so, you'll typically have one publisher at the beginning, and then you'll add on different publishers. So what is often really good to work into your contract is the ability to bring on a new publisher. So you may say, okay, something is you're going to have exclusivity if that's how you want to approach it initially. But if I'm going to offer you net exclusivity, I'm going to want to have this reversion right, or I'm going to want to have this right to claw back that territory or that version or that platform, because this publisher may not be great at it. So you can build those kind of things into the contract as well. So let's not forget about those things. You can work that in. So if you're in the process of negotiating, okay, you want the worldwide perpetuity, etc. Well, maybe I'm going to throw a reversionary clause in there that says if you don't exploit or if you don't reach these numbers in XYZ territory,
Hmm.
let's say Japan, or let's say on a platform, or let's say in a specific language, then I'm going to be able to give you notice. You'll have however much time, or you won't have time, and I'm just going to be able to say, okay, I'm giving that to somebody else. And again, that discussion, there can be like approval rights. The publisher A may say, okay, that's fine, but we want to be able to approve that publisher, and that wouldn't be entirely unreasonable for me to contemplate as a developer or as a lawyer for a developer. I may say, well, okay, you have to be reasonable about that, though.
Hmm.
We want to make sure that you're very reasonable, and you're going to have to tell me what is it that could stop you from approving that additional publisher.
Right. So just clearing that vagueness and not setting yourself up for just being at the mercy of someone's whim, essentially.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. And
yes.
it's also important to note that, as with any contract,
Hmm.
it's not set in stone forever, because if both sides of a contract ever want to change anything,
Yeah.
together they always can. And so, that's kind of an important thing to recognize when you're going into this as a indie developer. You're like, it's not the end of it necessarily. It's much harder to change, but it's not impossible.
Right. Yeah, sometimes the idea of contracts can come across as terrifying because
Mhm.
word on paper is solid and sealed. But to your point, if it's agreed, it's not that big of a deal. And you mentioned in passing, we mentioned the exclusivity across territories, focused on that. But you mentioned in passing also it could also be platform, not just
Yeah.
territories, but specific consoles or specific
Mhm.
um, distribution platforms. Now, another thing is all of these releases. How do we deal with the data? Who owns the data? If, let's say, I have a game and it's being published. Let's kind of stick with the examples we're having. We've got a game
Yeah.
going out in Japan. We've got a game in North America. Let's say we've got those publishers dealing with it. Um, do do I is it kind of assumed as a developer I get that data? Do I have to fight for that data? And I'm talking data broadly, anything from
Yeah.
sales to user analytics, anything that's not directly built into the game.
Yeah. So I'm glad you brought that up. Um, that's one of the areas where I traditionally it's being far more readily received by my clients, but it's something that I've been pushing my clients for a few years now, that we want this. We need this. You need to be able to know how your game is performing, not just on a this is my sales level, but on a visceral level. What are the players' reactions? What are they really reacting to? We need to see that data. In every publishing agreement, there's going to be this portion where the publisher is providing their tools for collecting analytics, and that has to be included. And you're in that same provision, they're telling you that you cannot put anything in there that may compromise the the integrity of the user's platform. So you can't have Trojan horses in there. You can't have any malware, all that stuff. It historically has been all bulked in together.
Hmm.
So the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that they also have that obligation, that all the tools that they provide you with, they're responsible for, and you're not taking responsibility for those things.
Okay.
If something turns out, if there's a data breach, if there's whatever, that's on you. That's not on me as a developer, and I want to make that very clear in my contract. So moving forward to, okay, what about this stuff? It's 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 going to be owned by the person collecting it typically, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the only one who uses it, right?
Hmm.
The material can be used by and can be provided to the developer. So I have typically said, okay, I want you as a publisher to share all that data with me so that I can go on, or share specific data with me so that I can go on to analyze my game that way, see, okay, where are my players reacting. That's going to help me as a developer move my game forward. I'm going to be able to create the right kind of DLC. If I'm going to do any expansion packs, if I'm going to create any monetization, how that monetization, if we have microtransactions, how best is it working? Are we all of a sudden saying, wow, it's not about me trying to make money off of unlocking new levels, the or new map packs. Everybody wants these bloody skins. And that's what people are focusing on. And wow, everyone keeps buying until they get the stupid rabbit skin. And once they get the rabbit skin, I notice that everyone stops buying or the buying trickles way down because, oh, well, maybe that was what was so desirable for my players.
Hmm.
I know then as a developer, I am creating a whole bunch of animal skins. And I am going to pivot it however the heck I need to in order to take advantage of that. And I wouldn't understand that unless I had the analytics data. So if the publisher isn't letting you isn't going to give you access to it,
Hmm.
then you can put your own analytics tools in. The publisher will typically want to know that, understandably, because they're going to then want you to take responsibility for the whole gamut. And we're talking about, you're going to need to make sure that the way you collect the analytics and everything is consistent with the legislation on privacy. You're going to have a proper privacy policy that protects you as well as the publisher. That your use of that material is only insofar as you need it, and that if you're using, and this is where it gets even more complex, if you're using third-party analytics tools like Google Analytics or some other analytics software and tools, their terms of use have now to be accepted by your users as well. So you want to make sure that all of that's encompassed. And the little cherry on top is when we're dealing with kids, and if the game is focused on kids, and if you do have children players, then you do need to have even more extensive protections in place, because you don't want to run afoul of the child protection legislation as well as just the privacy legislation.
Okay. Now, pardon me as I'm kind of jumping all over my notes,
No
but
worries.
in the let's say we see a lot of games now have a lot of revisions, sometimes even a name change through that revision or a different name on a specific console or a specific platform. Does the name change do anything? Does that protect the developer? Is there something that needs to be considered of, let's say I'm releasing, I don't know, XP game 1, and then in 10 years I'm thinking, you know what, it sold so, it's time to re-release it. Let's call it XP game remastered or something.
Mhm.
Is there any kind of benefit or anything to consider when it comes to naming revisions, or is that it doesn't matter?
I think that isn't so much a legal consideration as a business consideration. So you'll have you'll do your own market research, and there are also all kinds of consultants out there who can help you with that marketing portion of the agreement.
Hmm.
You can certainly speak to marketing consultants about that as well, and game development consultants, etc. They're going to be the ones who are going to tell you what the benefit is of it from a legal perspective. I'm going to want to make sure that that trademark that you're using is clear, and that you had the right to, if you're going to just hit the remastered button and just say that's what we're calling it, but we're still going to keep the original core, and so we're still keeping that original XP title in there, that we did have that right. And 10 years ago, we didn't give the right to the title to a publisher.
Hmm.
And while we have the right to the game, we may not have the right to the title, in which case that would be something that I would be thinking about on my end. Let's just make sure we have a clear chain of title to use the full new name, and that's not going to infringe on something else. Kind of related to that and involving the data analytics, here's another reason why it's so important, is that, yeah, when we're thinking about re-releasing a game, or when we're thinking about releasing a sequel, or when we're thinking about doing a whole different game, not even with the same publisher maybe, I want to have all that analytics to be able to create the pitch for my new game saying, look, we're really good at this because we know that when we created XP1,
Hmm.
we were firing on all cylinders. Everybody loved this aspect of gameplay. This is where people were going ballistic. This level, this, scene got so much attention on Twitch. It got so much gameplay. People would go back and play that one segment over and over again, or whatever it is. They really like that skin. When you're making another game, you can incorporate that type of analytical data in saying this is why this next game is going to do well.
Right.
And so again, that's yet another reason I'm just hammering in there on that analytics thing.
All right. I'm gonna jump over to the chat that has a question here.
Mm-hmm.
As a new studio, how do you make sure the publisher isn't taking advantage of your inexperience, as opposed to more established studios who have more negotiation power?
Get the best people you possibly can behind you. If you have to rely on other people's experience, choose people that you really trust.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, that really is the way. And use your common sense. If you're uncomfortable about something, ask for clarity. Turn around and say, hey, I kind of don't get this. What are you getting at with this provision? And honestly, sometimes when I'm working with clients, indie developers are often extremely cost conscious.
Hmm.
And I completely get that. So sometimes my strategies with indie developer clients can be that, okay, you know what? We're not going to chop this agreement up and send them a full revision right now. We've identified that there are a couple of non-starters for you, and these are make it or break it points. I may turn around and say, hey, you know what? Here's some very casual, non-legal jargon that you can totally like manhandle how you want to, manipulate it, tweak it, tone it down, put it in your words. But let's get this information from them, and let's not make it me, the lawyer guy, who's asking for it. Let's turn around and say, hey, look, hey, I'm just going to plead ignorance on this. When you say that you want all the rights in perpetuity to the character or to the code, are you saying that you want exclusive rights so that I can't use the code and that you can use it for any reason you want to? Or are we just saying that you're using it for the game, and if you want to, tweak the game, and if you need to do some bug fixes or something on your end, that you want to be able to do that? That may be a huge point to us because we may want to keep that code, or we may be using some third-party open source code that we literally cannot give ownership to another person or a publisher, because it's not ours to give them. So sometimes, yeah, just go and say, what do you mean? And I don't have a problem with that. I think that can be really useful, and I do highly recommend you do work with a lawyer, whoever that is, to work through these points, just so that you do have the best chance of understanding what the document is. One of the things I make a comparison for is like when you're going through, and I'm not sure if Tommy touched base on this already, but when you're thinking about using a lawyer on a any project or any video game, it's kind of like going on a trip. Before you go on a trip to a foreign country, you may want to go to the doctor and find out what kind of vaccinations you might want to get. What are your risks going there? Or what are your risks in doing this activity?
Hmm.
They're not telling you you have to take a whole slew of vaccines, but they're going to tell you, well, you're going to this area and there's a whole lot of malaria going around there. So if you don't want to deal with that, I'm really strongly suggesting this.
Hmm.
Now, there's also this other stuff that goes around there, and it's unpleasant to deal with. This is how much it costs to take those whatever drugs that you can take, those antibiotics, and this is what it will help you against. Let's just know what the risks are. Let's understand the relationship we're getting into. And that's kind of the role that you can also use a lawyer for is I want you to tell me what my risk exposure is.
Hmm.
And then I'm going to decide as the client and as the developer, I'm going to decide what advice I'm going to take and not take. That's always the client's prerogative. We're just there to make sure that we give you the best advice we can.
And potentially see any blind spots ultimately
Yeah,
in a field that some might not be otherwise comfortable navigating.
absolutely. And that goes to the reason you want to work with somebody who actually knows, can speak your language, knows the industry, and understands the ins and outs of that industry. Because, you know, I'm not going to get into a, and I'm not going to advise a client on a health related contract for pharmaceuticals because that's just not what I do. And, that comes very clear out front. So make sure you get the lawyer that actually does have that area of knowledge.
Great. Our viewer says thanks. That helps a ton.
Great.
Now we've covered data, exclusivity, marketing. In terms of timing, schedules, approvals, is there anything that developers should look out for there in terms of um, any of those aspects? Timing, schedule, approvals?
Yeah, that's a biggie. So you're going to have this, and this actually really doesn't only relate to publishing. This also relates to any kind of service work. So anyone who's in the audience that's falling asleep now, like, wake up! this this is big. Even when you're doing service work, because so many of the small studios need to do some service work now and again, the same thing. You're going to have a delivery schedule. You're going to have these milestones that you have to meet. You're going to have to move forward, and you're going to progress from your concept documents through your design documents, through your prototyping, through your playable demos, through your betas, through your alphas, through your gold and your release masters. Each step has so many different milestones in it. The clearer and more concise that is, the better for you. Now, I'm not saying you can't take an agile approach and you can't pivot, but what I want to say is that it's really important to lay out the parameters that you can be agile in and where you can move. So we're starting with a concept document. Once we've decided and we've agreed that that's what we're going to work from, then let's make sure that every step we move forward, we're not going back and changing something that's already been agreed to unless we both agree or unless we both have input. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, the publisher may turn around, or the service or the client in a service relationship may turn around and say, you know what, I want to tweak this. I want to change the way a character looks, or I want to change a functionality, or I want to change a special ability of a character, or hell, I want to change the monetization model. Vast different amount of work going into each one of these steps. Some of it, you know what? Yeah, might not be a big deal. We might have, lost a little bit of time because we put some time working on, the visuals, the animation, the UX, but it's not going to be super detrimental to us. And in fact, we kind of agree with you, and we think it'll work better the new way. So yeah, we're just gonna maybe do some slight alterations on the delivery schedule, and we'll just go forward with that. And it's not going to cost us any more money, so it's not going to cost you any more money. If it takes a little more time, or it doesn't take a little bit more time, that's fine. But that interaction is key. So a lot of the time, how I approach this is I say, and we put this into the language, that you cannot that we first put in place. Okay, we've got the milestones. How are we going to know that milestone is met? Well, we're going to deliver that deliverable to you when we think it's meeting all the criteria that it has to meet, and then you're going to respond with this nice little form that we've attached on the end of our contract that says, I accept or I withhold acceptance of this specific deliverable. And if I withhold this acceptance, this is where years of dealing with this has come into play. Tell me why. And tell me how you want it changed and fixed. So I can then identify, okay, you're telling me that you disagree with this, you're not going to approve this deliverable. You're going to then tell me this is why I'm not approving it, and then you're going to tell me this is what needs to be changed for me to approve it. So I, as the developer, either with a publisher or with a service relationship, can turn around and say, okay, I get it. I'm totally clear on what has to be done, and now I can see that doesn't require that we're changing something that we've already agreed to, or even sometimes if it does change something that we've already agreed to, we're okay with that because it's minor and we just want to move forward. I can't say how valuable that has been in the past. Now, that's not to say that we're not working in an agile relationship where our delivery schedule may change. And so at the end of each sprint or with each story, we may turn around and say, okay, we're going to adapt what that deliverable looks like. And that's okay too. We still have that structure in place that we know if it doesn't meet it, if it's going to be withheld, we have some position to either negotiate or we're easy to change it. We know why it's happening. Another thing I've often liked to do, and this is another little gem to throw in there, is so we have a delivery schedule, and it's going to take, the 18 months, and it's going to cover that period of time. I may turn around and say, okay, as a developer, I want to have for each 1 month block, or for each block, or for the entire time, I want a buffer. So I've allocated 280 hours to do this. I may turn around and say, I want 330 hours to do this because I want to have that extra, 20-ish% time to allocate to meeting your changes. That's going to give me a little bit more comfort because I know I'm not going to get into a position where I'm holding things up.
Right.
I know that you as a client or as a publisher are going to have to anticipate including that time. And if I don't have to use it, that's great. It's amazing. It may mean that there's more money in the budget for me to spend on other cool little features that I want to throw into it. or it may just mean that I'm going to have a really happy client or a really happy publisher because we got through this faster than we expected. So that was another little thing I like to do, and I'd like to push clients is just to build in a little bit of a buffer into your schedules. I can talk about a little bit about what happens when you don't agree to something, if that's useful.
Well, I'll let the viewers decide because I do want to make sure we also cover quality assurance before
Yep.
we hit the hour. So do let us know if there's any other questions in the chat, or if we want to talk about the bad case scenario when there's a disagreement, which I suspect there might be interest in that. um, while we wait for a
The
few.
QA is it's fairly it's fairly straightforward. Typically, it's going to be in the publisher relationship. The publisher is going to be the one who wants to make sure, but that doesn't stop the developer from also doing QA as well, because they're going to. It's in everyone's best interest to make sure that there's as much QA done as possible, and you're going to want to make it the best game possible for delivery and for release.
Mm,
Moving forward, it's also kind of in everybody's best interest that it gets going and it continues to be any bugs or any maintenance or repairs get updated. But for how long? And what about updates for changes in operating systems? What about changes in device? What about new platforms? How are we going to address this? Typically, new platforms have been, something that's dealt with separately and renegotiated. Someone is going to version it for the new platform, and that's going to be something that costs money, and that's just accepted by both sides, and that's still understood. Back in the day, remember when we were talking about that nice, sweet NES cartridge?
mhm.
Once you deliver that NES cartridge, it's done. You are not doing any more bug fixes. That's the end of it. It is not changing. That is how the game is going to be played for the life of that cartridge.
Right.
So that was kind of nice for the developers, believe it or not. Yeah, it was a little bit, concerning. You get a lot more paranoid. You get a lot more worried about making sure that you're developing and you're releasing the best possible game. But that was the end of your obligation. Now, all of a sudden, with digital content and updates, you can be on the hook forever. You could be on the hook for who knows how long. So that's something you do want to address in the contract. Okay, how long are we going to be responsible for bug fixes and repairs? Are we going to be responsible for updates and versioning? And what are we going to be paid for?
Right.
And who's going to pay for it?
So basically, drawing the end line. At what point does it end?
Yeah.
Or what does
And
that
it's gonna,
agreement look like beyond that?
yeah, and it's going to be a blurry one, and the typical publisher is going to say, "No, it's all yours. You're responsible for doing bug fixes. That's it. We don't want to have anything to do with it. It's on you. We tell you, or if we make you aware of it, you fix it."
Oh wow, that's rough.
But from their perspective, it's like, "Hey, you're delivering the game. You're the one who made the game.
Right. Yeah.
You're the one who can fix the game." And while the use of these third-party engines and things like that have really facilitated other people working on games, it still is true that the original developer, the person who made the game, is the best to repair the game and to develop it further, to do any of the DLC or to any of the repairs to it as well. Not the case necessarily to version it, but there is space to wiggle there, and you are able to say, okay, we will provide bug fixes and repairs for this amount of time or this many hours, after which we're going to require some financial compensation from you guys on your end or whatever.
Okay. We have the next question in the chat that kind of goes back to developers and publishers disagreeing. So good segue into that topic. And they're bringing up a recent story that kind of blew up in the news with the new Cooking Mama game that We won't get into the drama of that, but there was drama. So what kind of clauses could you build into an agreement to deal with fundamental disagreements like these? Perhaps mediation, etc., or any other suggestions?
Um, the mediation and the arbitration clause is awesome. I love it, especially uh, for indie developers, for smaller developers, smaller studios, and small to mid-size publishers. So what an arbitration clause is it says we're not going to go to court. We're not going to make this a big public hoopla, but we're going to make it such that if we have a disagreement, we have agreed to either a specific person, or we've agreed to a structure where we can each choose a person, or we can try and agree on a person, whatever that is, who's going to make that, or a panel of people, and they're going to make that decision for us, who's right or wrong. So it's very similar to a court, but it's private. And it typically can cost a little bit less, but not necessarily. In order to get to that spot, you have this beautiful notice provision that goes back and forth. Mm-hmm. So it goes something like this. I'm pissed with you. You screwed up because you should have done this and you're not doing that. I don't care. I'm going to ignore you. Hey, I'm really mad at you. I'm putting you on notice that you didn't do this. And if you don't do something about it, and if you don't fix it in 15 days or 30 days or whatever time period, then I'm going to go and start turning this arbitration process on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm still ignoring you. Okay, you've had your time. We've told you about it. So now we're recommending this arbitrator to resolve the dispute. And this arbitrator is going to cost $5,000 for a retainer. So we've delivered our $2,500 to this arbitrator. Mm-hmm. And you now have to either deliver $2,500 to this arbitrator, or you have to reject the arbitrator and find another arbitrator and pay them their half, or whatever that structure is. Typically, it's each person pays half up until the end. And then we're going to get into really going in the arbitration. Mm-hmm. What happens now is that I'm ignoring you changes to, damn, there's some money at stake now. Mm-hmm. We have to actually start putting out-of-pocket money. Yep. How important is this to us? How much is it going to cost us to go down this route? How much, is it going to cost us to, delay any further? And this is when I frequently will see two parties say, okay. Now we're going to play nice. And so I really, really like those arbitration clauses when you're dealing with two parties that are not huge. When you've got even one huge party that really couldn't care less about the $5,000, $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 that it could cost, mm-hmm. It's not going to do a whole lot for you. They're still going to react the same way they would otherwise. But it does create this really nice, reasonable sort of approach when you're dealing with small to mid-size. So I do like arbitration provisions. There are a whole bunch of other aspects that are way more technical that we could discuss, but I think that you can discuss that with the lawyer once you're in there. But that's why and that's what I like about arbitration provisions for our segment and for our industry. It also it doesn't have to be like some arbitrator. It doesn't even have to be a lawyer. It can be someone that two parties, especially if you're dealing with like a service relationship, there might be another indie developer that you both really respect, or there might be an executive in the industry that you both both sides really respect. And that could be the person that you even agree in advance that they're going to be that arbitrator. But you still have that beautiful build up to it where I got pissed off. I'm now officially giving you 15 days before I move forward. And those increasing threats make it dealt with more seriously.
Okay, very good advice. So I don't think we have any other questions, and we are at the hour. But was there any last like must point out item that we missed that you really want to get through?
Yes, yes. Advances are awesome. You do want to get money for your games that you've prototyped or that you've started development on. Whatever stage you're in, they're great. Um, Make sure that those advances are not refundable. I very rarely see that, but that is one of those like big red drapos that you're like, no, no, do not go there, because it's fine to recoup that money, and it's fine to say for a publisher to say, yeah, I'm going to give you a bunch of money up front. I want to get all or some of that back. Negotiate how they get that back. Does not mean that if they give you $50,000 or $250,000, that the first 50 or first $250,000 that the video game generates goes back to them. They may recoup on half of your share. They may recoup on less than half of your share. Recoupable can be fine. Refundable, hell no. And then the other word you have to be really cautious of is if you see the word cross-collateralization. And that's one of these technical terms that I don't necessarily see a lot of clients fully appreciating. What that means is that if you're doing more than one title or more than one property with any party, publisher, etc., that they can use all those different properties to recover funds that they might have given you, or they can use those different properties to satisfy obligations. You want to keep those separate. You want to say, if I do extremely well with game A, just because game B or game C didn't do well, it doesn't mean that you're entitled to any more out of game A than you were if I didn't do game C with you. So cross-collateralization and advances are, I think, kind of like the last two little bullet points. I know they're not exciting, and I wish that there was like something like, yay, super cool to say, but yeah.
Well, I think you've done a pretty good job at still making the topic of law and contracts interesting despite their dry nature, really. But let's say if anybody wants to get a hold of you, maybe reach out, get more information, is there kind of a resource that you'd like to direct them to as to how to get a hold of you? Or maybe just any kind of legal counsel?
So I'm sure that Tommy will. Has he already presented, or is he tomorrow?
He's tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay. So I'm sure that he'll say the same kind of thing. When you're looking for a lawyer, like, take your time. I strongly suggest you first go to friends and colleagues and people that you have a relationship with, so that they can recommend a lawyer to you. Because they know, if you're in the same business, they know where the position you're at, and they have this vested interest in keeping you as a friend. So you kind of want to do a solid for your friend, so they're going to recommend a good person. And so do that. Look for those recommendations. I like LinkedIn just because you will know if they're related to a whole bunch of your colleagues and people in the industry, and that also gives you an idea of the knowledge base. Talk to a few lawyers, because honestly, like, we can be really charming buggers, and that doesn't mean we're going to be great lawyers. So make sure you talk to them and don't waste their time, but take your time in getting to know them, and know that comfortable that they know your industry, they know your field, and that you can trust them. Don't forget, you're spending money hourly with someone. So if they're not able to communicate with you efficiently, it's just going to be more expensive. So think about these things when you're looking for a lawyer, and talk to more than one, because you never know what the next person's going to be like, and you can't gauge how great someone is without that. If you ever want to talk to me, I'm very readily available to chat. My URL is mediaslaw, so it's either the grammatically incorrect pluralization of media to medias law, or it's the social commentary on the state of our media and legal elements as the media slaw. Take it however you like. And so it's mediaslaw.com or mediaslaw.com. And my information's up there. Info at is the best way. I typically do like to communicate via email rather than Twitter or any social media. And yeah, it's an amazing industry, and we have to look out for the developers, because they create some pretty amazing properties. In fact, a little shout out here to Spooky Squid and one of their titles that they're well known for, and I found incredibly frustrating was They Bleed Pixels, but a really good game.
Very good. Well, we have got the chat saying thanks for the great answer on your on the disagreement. Thanks for the talk. Been very informative. Thank you for the information. It was very useful. Thanks again, Emmanuel. Thank you for the talk. It's a lot of clapping. So again, thank you for taking the time and joining us here on XP Game Developers Online.